Hi, y'all. We're going to talk about property tax today. And by we, I mean Jordan. She's our property tax expert. So she's going to roll us through the presentation, and I'm going to learn alongside you. So we'll follow the same format. We'll have a slide presentation. Jordan will drive, and then we'll do questions at the end. And then we'll see you all at 3 p.m. in council chambers for budget committee.
Exactly. You all ready to get going? Let's see. Can you all see a slide PowerPoint show?
No, there's a message. There you go.
Now it's live.
All right, perfect. Okay, welcome to another day of Show Me the Money. Oh, that button didn't work. Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry, y'all. I got too overeager. All right, today is your property tax day. We all pay it. I hope you're paying it mostly out of your escrow so you don't have to see it every single time. Our property taxes is one of the main ways we have and continue to pay for city government, but the structure has changed over time. So we're going to dive into some details about how property tax works. So, how many were Oregon property owners prior to 1990? Oh, none of us. Well, we should have been, because that's when the market was really good. We could have gotten a house for really cheap. But prior to 1990, oh, pardon me, I'm going to sneeze. Your house would be reassessed every 6 years, and you would be taxed on whatever that assessment was. So that's called the real market value of the house. It's the auditor's best guess, or sorry, the assessor's best guess of how much you could sell your house for at the time that it's assessed. So that's how property taxes worked prior to 1990. And during this period is when property taxes paid for almost all city services. But then some changes, 1990s. Welcome, folks, welcome in. We are just getting going on property taxes for the new faces in the room. So in 1990, via a citizens ballot initiative, our property tax system had its first major change, and that was in Measure 5. And Measure 5 capped how many total property taxes you'd have to pay. And we'll go over that detail. And then 1997, we had Measure 50, which changed the value that your property taxes are calculated on, capped the growth of that value, and set permanent taxing rates for every single taxing jurisdiction. So we're going to dive into those two measures, and then we'll dive into kind of the impacts that we see today on how property tax is structured in Oregon.
This is Sabrina's class.
Oh, good.
And this is the deputy city manager.
Yeah. All right.
And it's
You need a
wonderful.
charger?
I think, there we go, perfect. All right, Measure 5. So Measure 5 was passed in 1990, and what Measure 5 did is it set caps on how much you could be taxed. So as we discussed a couple sections ago, your property tax bill is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is government services. So that's the county, the city, vector control, Rogue Valley Transportation District. And then there's education services, which is our school district, our community college, and the education service district. And then the third category was facility bonds, which is its own whole separate category that are all voter approved bonds for building infrastructure. So what Measure 5 did is it set limits on education and government. And it said, no matter what, you cannot be taxed more than $10 per 1,000 of your real market value for general government, or $5 per 1,000 for education districts. And if at the time you were paying more, you automatically didn't have to pay that amount of money. And when that happens, when your tax bill is higher than what you have to pay, it's called compression. Right, as of 2017, 65% of Oregon cities are in that compression, meaning the total total tax they could get is compressed down because of Measure 5. And I kind of want to show an example of compression. Can you all see my mouse on the screen as I move it? Okay, great. So let's say you have a house It was built in 1989 and it's worth $200,000 right now. So measure 5 says that we can only do $5 per 1,000, so you can only pay a total of $1,000 in taxes for ed and $2,000 for government. But when your tax rate is calculated, you owe more than that. So even though that those education districts should get $35 more off of you, you are only paying the $1,000 mark. So that extra $35 and that $52, governments don't get to see. To show you the level of compression, when it was first introduced in 1990, the next tax year, I think 51 million was lost in revenues to taxing districts because of that compression. So it had an immediate impact of the loss of revenue that cities were previously receiving.
Jordan, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So how do you, does my tax bill show the tax rated numbers, or does it show the taxes that I can pay, that I should pay?
Yeah, so what your tax bill will show, and I'll see if I can pull mine up here at the end of class,
Okay.
but it'll show you your real market value, it'll show you your assessed value, which is measure 5, and then it only shows you the amount that you pay for each taxing district. But I will send you a link to our county assessor's website that'll show you how much you pay for each district per 1,000. So the tax rate for each district.
Thank you.
Of course. Any questions on measure 5 and compression before I move on to measure 50? So at this point, 1990, for all of us that still don't have a house owned yet in Oregon real estate, we are still being taxed on the real market value, so what our house could sell for, but that total amount we pay is limited. That significantly changed in 1997 with Measure 50. And so Measure 50, which was also a citizen ballot initiative, the first thing it did is it set a permanent rate limit for each taxing district. So it said, City of Ashland, whatever you were taxing back in 1996 is the maximum amount that you can tax forevermore. So in Ashland, we were assigned a taxing rate of $4.2865 per every $1,000 of value. That has not changed since 1997. It cannot change unless there is a statewide ballot initiative. There was one workaround to this, and that's called the local option levy, where we could put a measure on the ballot where we ask voters to pay more on their property taxes for a specific purpose, but that can only last for 5 years. We'd have to renew that ballot measure every 5 years. This is like the youth activities levy that we all pay for our school district. So the second major thing that Measure 50 did was to separate property tax from real market value. So in 1997, it said we're creating a new value, and that's going to be called our assessed value. So your assessed value is 10% less than whatever your house was worth in 1997. So that's how it was set when this ballot initiative passed. And then that assessed value that was set in 1997 can only grow by 3% a year. The only way that that 3% growth could be higher is if you made a major remodel to your house or you built a brand new house. But when you do a major remodel or you build a brand new house, the assessed value doesn't gain how much you spent on that or how much it's now worth. It gains a proportion of that called the change property ratio. So I'm going to give an example. For example, in Talent, after the fire, people lost their home instantly, right? They lost a huge amount of value in their land. And say they had to rebuild a $500,000 home. So they rebuilt their home. It's brand spanking new. It's now worth $500,000. The change property ratio at the time that house was built was 0.5. So what they did is they took that 0.5, they times it by how much that real market value is. So they're only paying taxes on $250,000 of that house. That's how the change property ratio works. So Measure 50 in particular had major impacts on how city revenues, how different tax and different revenues, how they could grow over time. And I'll show you some charts in a minute, but before we show charts, I want to show you all the impacts to you. But before I do that, I forgot about this slide. So this blue bar here, this is the real market value of all the property in Oregon. And this is the assessed value. So you see it dipped 10% when this was adopted in 1997, and it's been only increasing, by 3% every year. So you can see that that gap between real market value and assessed value has grown over time. But let's talk about how Measure 5 and 50 have impacted you all and how your property taxes likely compare to your neighbors or other folks in town. So the first kind of inequity for us to talk about is called base year inequity. So before 1990, houses, 1/6 of houses were reassessed every single year. So every 6 years, your house was reassessed. But when Measure 5 went into place, and when Measure 50 went into place, it
Excuse me,
froze.
I can't see your screen now.
Oh, you can't? Can you all see the screen, or is it gone?
No,
Yeah.
we're seeing
Yeah.
it. I'm seeing it fine.
Ginny, it may be hidden behind another window. And so, I'm going to keep going if you all don't mind. So for example, we have two homes, Home A and Home B. Both have a real market value of $150,000, and they've been growing in value at 8% every year. It's a good housing market for that decade. But Home A was last assessed in 1990, and Home B was assessed in 1996. And so when Measure 50 was adopted, Home A hadn't been reassessed in 6 years, and so its value was set at $150,000. Home B had just been reassessed before this tax bill went into place, and so its assessment was set at $220,000. They're worth the exact same on the real market, but their assessed value is very different. And you can see that the property taxes owed for Home A, which hadn't been assessed in 6 years, and Home B, which had been assessed recently, is significantly different, even though the value of the homes on the real market are the same. Does that base year inequity make sense? So the issue that I had here is the way it went into effect. People with the same value in property might be paying very different property tax levels, just by luck of the draw.
What was the rationale for that?
I think it was the way that the ballot initiative was structured. It was a citizen initiated ballot measure. And I don't know much more detail around the logic that went behind crafting it. But we see that, with a lot of ballot initiatives, implementation is sometimes very different than expectations at the time. I mean, Measure 110 is one example of that recently. So another inequity that occurred with these two measures, Measure 5 and Measure 50, is a neighborhood to neighborhood inequity. And the same reason of how values were locked in 1996, slower growing neighborhoods. So for us, rather than neighborhood, it's mostly city to city comparison. So cities that are growing slower in their markets, housing markets, and other cities tend to have a higher taxing burden overall. And why is that? Because as their real market value for one city has gone up really fast, assessed value has stayed low, while the other city, the real market value has stayed closer to assessed value. So we're finding that lower income neighborhoods or lower income cities that have slower growing housing markets have a higher taxing burden relatively compared to more wealthy communities with faster growing housing markets. And then finally is this new property inequity. And this comes down back to that changed property ratio of when you build a new house, you're not taxed on the full value of the house at the time it's built. You're taxed on this portion of it, and that portion is based on the changed property ratio. That changed property ratio is calculated county-wide. And so it's an error of averages. So for example, let's say you have a home in 1996. It was built, it was worth $150,000 on the market. Its assessed value was set at $150,000, and it's been growing in value. So that in 2010, it's worth $570,000, but the assessed value is only at $227,000 because of that 3% growth cap on assessed value. So the ratio, 227 out of 570 is 0.4. So let's say a brand new house is built, and that house is built that is the exact same value as that first home that's been around for a while. That brand new house is being applied the change property ratio for the entire county, which is larger than what it was specifically for the town or jurisdiction. So this house in a neighborhood with relatively high housing markets, they are paying a slightly higher tax than the other house of the same cost that had been built 2 decades ago. So this is typically what you see in a faster housing market. If you look in a similar city, but with a lower, slower growing housing market, say Talent or Phoenix before the Almeda fire, same thing. We have a house that was built in 1996. It was worth $150,000 back then. It was assessed at $150,000 back then. In 2010, it's grown, it's almost doubled. It has the same assessed value, however, because this has grown 3% every single year. So it has a very high ratio, means the difference between the assessed value and the real market value is close to 1. So they're paying taxes on $234,000 a year in 2011. A brand new house built in the exact same year, worth the exact same amount of money, they're only paying taxes on $143,000. So it's causing this inequity where new properties actually have a lower tax burden than older homes of the same value. And then finally, looking at our commercial and our industrial property, that change property ratio is determined based on the type of property. There's residential property, commercial property, and industrial property. And because of what was calculated at the time, and primarily because industrial property tends to depreciate over time because they also have investments on top of it, what's happened is industrial property has significantly higher taxes than commercial property. And what we've seen over time is this has slowly pushed industrial outside of Oregon, where taxes are much lower for industrial property owners. And we've had an increase of industrial being converted into commercial land because of the lower cost point. Any questions? So really the takeaway I want you to take from these last 4 slides is the way property tax works in Oregon means a property that's worth the exact same between 2 properties may pay very different taxes. The benefits of Oregon's property tax system, I don't want to forget to add, for you all as individual taxpayers is you have low property taxes in comparison. They are capped at a certain growth, so you can determine and project how much your property tax is going to be. And it's helped keep costs low for property owners. How that has translated for cities. Oh yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
Yeah, sorry, didn't get to my on button quick enough. The 3% increase in our property tax per year, is it mandated that it has to be 3% or is it up to 3%?
It is up to.
And who determines whether it's 3% or a little less?
Yeah, so the assessor determines it. And I will send you a very hilarious video from the early 2000s about the tax fairy, but they'll show and explain what happens when your real market value becomes less than your assessed value. So back in 2014, 2015, we had, a bit of a housing market bubble drop. And what happened, particularly in Deschutes County, is a lot of properties' values became less than the assessed value. And so what happens is you then get taxed on the lesser of either your assessed value or your real market value. And so that's when less than a 3% increase will happen. But as long as your real market value is higher than your assessed value, it'll be predictably 3% every year. And I will say Ashland's average, we average between 3.25 and 3.75% increase in property tax revenue citywide every year. And that's largely due to that 0.25 and 0.75 is due to new buildings coming into our jurisdiction. So that's kind of what this graph shows here. So here's the tax revenue that the city collects from property taxes. And it's roughly at a 3% slope. I think this is a 3.4% slope. This purple line shows if we never had Measure 50, how much property taxes the city would be collecting each year. And so the gap between what we get here in 2024 and what we would have gotten if we actually taxed you on real market value is about $9 million per year. And to give you just kind of a way to help balance that out, so we've been talking a lot about a $5 park fee. A $5 park fee would bring in $750,000 a year. So that gap is kind of the equivalent of $61 in fees per month for you all on your utility bill. We don't charge you that much on your utility bill. It is lower, but that is why the way cities have funded services has changed over time. So that's why you see this diversification of revenues, is because cities are trying to make up the gap of what used to be property tax revenues for us. Questions on either of those two graphics? And the one thing I want to point out on this last graphic, if you were to adjust this line for inflation, particularly because we had that high inflation that happened during COVID, the real dollars or the actual spending ability we have in 2024 is the same spending ability as 2017. That line has remained perfectly flat in terms of how many revenues are coming into the city when you compare it with inflation. So when we talk about our budget deficits for this coming year and in the future, a lot of it is because our revenue is flatlining. I'm realizing these were two very depressing slides to end on, so I'm trying to figure out how to end it on a more fun note. So how does this work in other states? I do want to touch base on how this works in other states, because a lot of other states also cap their property taxes, and they cap the growth of it. And the main difference between Oregon and, say, California and Colorado is that every time a house is sold, that assessed value is reset. So here in Oregon, the only way that your assessed value will change more than that 3% is if you have a remodel or if you build an entirely new building. Selling does not affect the property taxes paid on properties.
Is there a rationale for that?
You know, for us, it was the way the ballot measures were written. They were definitely written with the goal of keeping property taxes low over time. If we were to change that, it would either require 2/3 of the legislature to vote for a change, or a ballot initiative approved by the voters of Oregon. So it's a pretty high lift for Oregon to change how property taxes are structured.
I think one element to think about if we were going to try to change this is the lobbying groups that would be against that change. I think generally the public may be open to real estate transactions having a reset or revaluation around property tax, since that is so common. But you would have certain industries like the Realtors Association who would probably come in and argue or lobby against it with the argument that it would deter people from purchasing homes or buying homes, etc. So there's, depending on your worldview or where you sit, you're going to have a different feeling about that, right? And for jurisdictions, the hard part is the demand for service has not reduced over time, and the types of services wanted have increased. And that's where that crunch comes with that. So if we think about even just our use of EMS and the change we've seen there in terms of, ambulance calls and the types of things we call ambulances for, that has changed significantly since COVID, let alone since the 90s. And so all this change has happened, but the way that we do the funding has not changed.
I follow residential real estate just kind of for fun. And I noticed a big difference in what property taxes are paid on different properties, that like it made no sense that some house that was newer was paying less tax than some other house that was older. It's like there was no rhyme or reason. And now you've explained that through history, things have happened that would cause those differences that are otherwise inexplicable.
And I think going back to your question, one thing that wasn't foreseen, those differences back in 1997, back in the early 2000s, they were all really small because assessed value was still roughly 90% of real market value. It's as time has moved on that those impacts and those inequities have gotten larger and larger to where it's now, as you said, really noticeable that a new home might have lower taxes than a home that's been here for 30 years.
Is there any movement on citizens' part or on anybody's part to change Measure 50 and Measure 5?
Yeah, maybe
League
somebody
of-
talk to that more.
Sorry, you want me to take it? Talked over you, Jordan, apologize. League of Oregon Cities is kind of the city lobbying group at the state and level. And they've commissioned a study to look at possible ways to resolve this issue, to be able to kind of tell the story that Jordan just so nicely laid out for us, and kind of advocate for some change of how we do that. It's a balancing act of affordability, right, with being able to provide services at the local jurisdiction level. And how do you do that perhaps with a different model of state shared revenue as well? So I think there's other elements with this, but there are groups. I think the biggest group is probably local government, that would like to see this change, because on the flip side, without that change, we're having, as Jordan pointed out, to change how we fund things. And so that's where you see more fees coming online, transitions to different taxing districts or special option levies or other ways to try to get the funding to be able to provide that service. Because as we've kind of demonstrated before, as time goes on, that gap is only getting bigger. And so how do we continue to provide essential services, quality of life services? And the only way we can do that is to find additional revenue sources, but there's only so many revenue sources we're going to be able to tap into without making a larger transition with a major revenue stream. I'd love a citizen-led initiative to have property tax reform, but I don't know that would come about. I mean, some states have had property tax reform, so it does happen, but it is, as Jordan stated, a big lift to do that and push that through.
Yeah, it probably takes several years to educate people and get them to think that it's a good idea, and then finally adopt it.
I live in this
Either
world and
direct.
you talk about taxes and I don't want to hear it, right? Just as like a citizen, right? So yeah, there's it's a big education campaign, and it's overwhelming. Jordan did a really nice job. She does a really nice job of laying it out, but it is fairly complicated to understand the intricacies of why we're seeing that happen. Because it's kind of a multi-pronged issue for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say, if you're going to buy a new home anytime soon, look at that property tax rate, because that might influence your choice of if you choose one home or another.
Makes me want to get out my taxes right now and look at them.
Yeah, if you're interested in your own tax bill, the county assessor is the best way to pull that up. We don't have that on the city website. We have a link to the county assessor, but that's not us. So it is always interesting to see all of the districts that are there and what your individual tax bill looks like. Because you don't really see it if you have a mortgage. Typically, it's kind of just there for
Right.
me.
It's in your monthly payment and you don't,
Yeah,
yeah.
not really.
Unless you tell your mortgage company, I'm paying the taxes, and then you get it correctly.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at the big number and not the not the
And they're like,
little
oh, maybe I
percentages.
don't want to do that.
That's not quite true. I mean, I see the taxes, I get something from the county every year that has that, and the mortgage bill, that I get from the mortgage company also has it broken down.
Yeah, I get that too. So I get the bill and I don't pay it once a year because well, hopefully, the mortgage company will pay it. And then every once in a while, they're like, we've collected too much. Here's a refund check. You're like, yes. And then the other way is we've collected too little and now your mortgage is going up. I'd like that less. Yeah, so it does change.
But I mean, I think this is required by law, but the mortgage statements that I see has all of the escrow broken down as to what what it goes for, and property taxes is, of course, the big part of it.
Yeah, nice.
And so what I'll do, probably tomorrow morning, I'll send you all an email with some fun links. One, to some more resources to get more in depth with the math of property taxes, or to watch that fun tax fairy video. I'll send you a link of how to look up your own property taxes online. And I'll also send you a link to the assessor's website where you can see what the taxing rates for every jurisdiction are. And if you get really into it, you can dive into deeper tables to see how much money is being lost to compression, how much do we actually have of assessed value, etc. So I'll send some more emails or some more links out tomorrow for you all to play with.
So in terms of city strategies that will affect revenue from property taxes, it's basically housing and economic development are the levers that you can pull to increase the revenue to the city.
Yeah, there's two methods. One is increase the growth happening in Ashland. This is what Medford is being very successful at. Bend is being very successful at. They're just getting so much new build, their property taxes are going up. The second option we have is to look at creating a special tax district or some other district that it would be a property tax, but it wouldn't be a property tax that goes to the city. McMinnville just did this they create a fire district. There's been talk in the past of a parks district. And then I guess the third option is that operations levy, which can go every 5 years to have additional taxes on people's properties to help pay for specific operations. But
How
yes,
much do you
economic development is the core that we're trying to push and work on.
if you do an operations levy, do you have to be specific about what particular operation it will cover, or can you just say city operations?
It could be general. The catch is typically voters like to know what they're paying for.
Of course.
And then the trick is we can't, that extra tax that's passed as an operating levy counts towards that $10 per 1,000 of assessed value limit. So right now, all of your taxes that you pay for government taxing districts, and I can pull up the slide here, equates to roughly $7.50 per every $1,000 of assessed value. And so we only have about $2.50 of wiggle room before we hit that ceiling of $10 maximum. And once we hit that ceiling, no more tax revenue comes in. And so there are limits to those operating levies. And actually, I'll pull it into that email. We see that in our school district right now. There is a youth activities levy, which is awesome. It's been in place since 1994. But they are losing out on about $500,000 a year because of that compression. They've hit the ceiling, and so they should be collecting an additional $500,000 as approved by the voters, except Measure 5 kicks in and does not allow that tax to be collected. So they're losing about 10% of their operating levy.
And who's losing this 10%?
The school district.
Ah,
Well, that's got to be discouraging.
You know, it's a part of property taxes in Oregon.
But frustrating if the voters approve it or support it, but then they're not able to follow through, right, and collect that. And I will say, in a follow-up to Jordan, you know, some of the things the city will be looking at in the next several years, there is a South Valley kind of gap analysis, regional look at the fire service. So we have several fire districts and then fire departments like Ashland has. So I don't know if you've noticed, but when we have an event, we have a lot of people show up, not just our fire, because we have a lot of very strong mutual aid agreements between all of the fire jurisdictions. So looking at if there's a better, efficient way to do fire service in the South Valley between the fire districts and the cities, since there's a lot of redundancy and the staffing needs as well as the equipment. And we all come to the party anyways when we have an incident. So we are going to be looking at that, which is important for Ashland because Ashland Fire and Rescue, definitely a very important and vital department, but also our most expensive department in the general fund. And so if there is a better way to provide this level of service and coverage, that's potentially very beneficial to the city. So we'll be looking at that for sure. And then, you know, not seeing any property tax relief in sight, continuing to explore other revenue opportunities. There aren't any kind of big windfalls out there in terms of just righting the ship, but you know, are there other ways we can bring in additional revenue? Part of that is making sure that our miscellaneous fees and cost recovery elements that we do have, that we're keeping up with that as well. So we'll be continuing to work on that.
So if there's a like one master fire district that all
Want to rule them all.
yeah, well, yeah, taking over the world. And the fire department's taking over the world. And so Ashland would not have its own fire department then. Does the general fund money that goes to the fire department now stay with Ashland, or does it somehow go to the district?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that money would stay with the general fund. So there would be an additional taxing district layered on top, right? Because that's how districts, but what that would mean for the city's financials is the potential opportunity to reduce like the public safety fee, the wildfire fee, like look at the other revenue streams. So if we're losing this big expense, what is the revenue level that we need moving forward, right? Because that would free up like $15 million the biennium year. How expensive is fire? I should know this. We have budget meeting in like 20 minutes. But yeah, so obviously that money, right? And do we need to stay at the same tax level that we're at? All of that would need to be assessed if we were to do that, because the tax level we're at and the fees that we are wanting and requesting and have is to maintain that level of service. So if we don't have that anymore, we can kind of reassess that.
I would think it would result in some sort of some windfall for the general fund for
Oh, it would
Ashland.
be a big windfall. So then it would be a bigger discussion about, okay, do we need to continue bringing in this level of revenue? Do we have other services that we want to provide, to the community that the community is wanting, or do we need to reduce, fees or tax rate or whatever? So that would be the conversation that would need to happen.
So if Ashland didn't have its own fire department anymore and there were a bigger overall, I don't know, umbrella group, who would pay for the overall umbrella group? Wouldn't we have to contribute something?
Yeah, you would have another taxing district, right? So that's why I'm saying, like, we wouldn't, the money wouldn't follow the district. There'd be another district. So like, just like the mosquito abatement district, there'd be like the fire district. And so they would have their own tax levy. And so that's where we would have to, as a city, reassess our tax level and our fees, the revenue that we're bringing in to support that operation, because now the community is paying in a different way for that service. Yeah.
And so we as citizens would, instead of having 9 levels on our taxes, we'd have 10 levels of 10 taxes to pay.
Yeah.
One more tax to pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is combining all of the fire departments under consideration? Is there an effort to do that now, or is that just kind of a thought for the future?
There's going to be a study over the next couple of years looking at more gaining efficiency and how we operate better in Southern Oregon around fire. Given the kind of increasing concern around wildfire, the increasing expense around fire departments, how do we move forward sustainably and ensure that we have the coverage that we need? And Ashland having a ladder truck, in District 5 having a ladder truck, in District 3 having a ladder truck, and like, do we all need ladder trucks? I don't know. Like, right. So what's the right level of equipment and staffing for the region for this? So that's what's going to be looked at between the fire districts, the city, working with the county as well.
But not for a couple of years, probably.
It would be we need to do the study first, and that would be a very long discussion that would obviously involve, if we want to make a change with the tax, that's a vote of the people. There's a whole, it's a process. Yeah.
Okay.
But I do think it needs to be looked at. Since, we have our fire station 2 is very close to District 5's immigrant lake station. So there's a lot of
variables,
building and people and equipment to kind of assess and see what's the best way to move forward. And we're already, like, our battalion chiefs are helping District 5. So we're already kind of doing it in a way. Is there a better way to formalize that and all work together?
Yeah, and with the problems that District 5's having District 3 taking over the management of it, that would seem to be even more of a sense of a regional system already in place.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to have that discussion, because I think there's some alignment around operations happening already. And in Southern Oregon, my general assessment is all of the fire administration, the fire chiefs, up to the state level, they all work really well together. So I think it will be a fruitful study and a good look at what we can do moving forward.
The insurance for homes, though, could change by distance from fire stations. You get rated on your insurance based on how close the fire station is.
Yeah, it could also get better because we'd have increased staffing because we're all sharing staff. So that's what will be looked at. Yeah. Or like we would get credit for District 5's ladder truck, which we don't have right now. Things like that. So, yeah. So who's going to start a citizen initiative to reform property tax? Show of hands. No? Okay.
We'd probably screw it up anyway. There'd be some other unintended consequence that would be.
Well, that happened last time, and look at us. We're muddling through. You don't know unless you try.
Then we'd have to redo it and 10 years and get the gap down again and then start all over.
That feels very government-like, so.
California's still dealing with Prop 13.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Boy, was that a mess.
Some people benefited.
Well, next class, we will talking, because as Benji mentioned, economic development is one of the tools to help raise property values and keep property tax growing. So we'll talk about the various tools around economic development specific that a city can do at our next session next week.
So
I have sort of an
I forget.
unrelated question. Is the parks, because they're now under the city, has that caused some problems with their funding? It seems that they need to have more money, hence the $5 or $10 fee. Is it because they're now under the city that this has come up, or is this just normal?
So they've been under the city since the dawn of Ashland. They've always had an
Oh, really?
independent elected
I
commission.
thought they were kind of a separate, that they ran their own deal. You know, you
No,
always
so
hear
prior
they
to
want and
property
need.
tax, they had a percentage of the property tax that was automatically assigned. But since that those measures have come into play, they've just been a general fund department.
Okay.
So they are the city. We are parks, they are us, I guess we are.
Yeah, you're all one.
Yeah, and so it just kind of like every other city with the general fund, you got police, you got fire, you got finance, you got city manager's office, you got parks, we're all in the general fund. And so it's a competition in a way to get those dollars. And so with parks, because they have that independently elected commission, it's more of a public discussion than what you've seen, though that will come to a swift end at 3 p.m. With other departments, because other departments have also cut their budget 5% and we've laid off other staff. It just hasn't been discussed publicly yet.
Been quite as vocal.
At 3. So yeah, it's just they're a little bit ahead of some of the other departments. Yeah. So
Is there any chance of getting that $5 or $10 fee through? Or is that just dead in the water?
I mean, between us in the room, in the Zoom room, I'm hopeful that we will get the $5 fee. I think all departments are feeling some pain, including the city manager's office, and having to reduce some elements. But my hope is with the $5 fee, we can bring some of that stuff back online. The budget I am presenting does not have any fees in it because that is the direction that council gave. And so it looks like there are significant cuts, which there are if we don't get the fee. So I am hopeful that we'll get there. We've had kind of overwhelming support for the parks fee from the public, which is, asking people to pay more is never popular. So for people to come out and advocate for parks, I think is pretty powerful and a testament to the good job that Parks does in providing some really great benefits to the community. So we'll see. But that is another revenue grab, so to speak, because of this gap around services. So yeah, we'll see. I'm sure it will be a topic over the next 3 budget committee meetings as well as council. And there's a joint parks and city meeting next Wednesday where this will be the topic of discussion as well. So that will be televised if you want to watch that. So.
And fun fact to link that to property tax, our parks used to have an operating levy from 1995 to 2008. And so really since between 2008 and 2025 is when we've had these revenue difficulties for our parks programs.
So in my opinion, it makes sense to stop buying parks and stop and that would be the way to cut down on an outgo for the property, but also additional maintenance. And it would seem that like slimming down the operations would be a way to reduce the need for revenue for the department. And yeah, And I'm not sure that, um, what is this? Wanting to know what language I want to speak. How weird. Um, it just seems like parks, um, I know they're tied into the history of Ashland, and I know they've been a big deal since the beginning, but they also seem like they're just over consuming our revenues.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think
You
it's
know,
hard to balance.
I heard a presentation by the new director of the parks, and he threw out a statistic that, and I didn't really quite catch the years, but over the last 15 or so years, their staff has gone from 50 to 35. So, the parks certainly are, in terms of their staffing, are shrinking. Now, whether that's a big reduction in the cost of personnel, I don't know. But I think the parks do a wonderful job, and I would not like to see them shrink, perhaps not growing very much more. But it is something that makes Ashland Ashland and, not Klamath Falls.
Yeah, I think the hard part for Jordan and I and other city staff is depending on the person, you have a very strong opinion on the park's level of service. And that's what APRC and city council have to balance is the feedback that they get from the community and how do you move forward. I will say in response, Lisa, to your comment that both this city and parks has properties they need to divest of. So that, we have properties that we hold because there was a plan at some point to do something with them and that has changed. And so the maintenance of those properties persists, right? You have to mow them or whatever.
Right, right.
And so that will be a big discussion that's coming forward. Summer, fall is how do we kind of streamline around the properties that we own. And that includes some of the parks properties too that were acquired that maybe we're not going to fully realize and where should the emphasis be with that department as well. So I would say across the board, the city has some work to do there for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be one thing you could do is sell them to an affordable housing developer.
We're happy to do that.
I don't know of any right now, but if I do, I'll send them your way.
There's the one on East Main that was going to be developed into a skateboard park or something. That's on hold now, and it's a fairly large piece of property.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I think
it
some of
is.
the property will probably RFP for affordable housing. Some of it will need to go for market rate because it goes to a specific fund that needs full cost recovery. So that's the other, because everything we do has to be complicated. The other confounding factor is not all pieces of property are equal that we own. Some are owned by the general fund, some are owned by wastewater, some are owned by, it just kind of depends. So
Mm.
yeah, so we'll work on fleshing that out and moving on that moving forward. I would like less property to manage personally. It's not all about me, but that is on my wish list. I think Jordan would probably second me on that. So yeah.
Yeah, but once you sell the property, you're not going to be able to go back and buy some more later.
No,
You could require any development to include some green space, open space. Doesn't all have to be built up. There could be some part of the land preserved for the public use.
for sure.
Certainly Lithia Park is a gem for the city because the tourists who come for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and some of the other theaters, they're right there. The Lithia Park's right there, and it's a beautiful walking space. And certainly we need to maintain it. So
I was gonna sell that first, Elaine.
yeah,
No?
I know, right?
All right, we'll keep that one.
I think so.
Yeah, no, Lithia Park is great. A lot of our parks are really great. And Rocky may have shared this, Peter, when you were talking to him, but we have park super users here in the community. Our residents use parks more than probably any other Oregon community. And we have great parks, and people move here for the parks and visit for the parks. So they're definitely a good asset. So yeah, I'm curious where the discussion will go. So
Why is restoring the Perosi Fountain or whatever it's called such a priority for the Parks Commission?
Mhm.
I would say it's a priority for the Ashland Parks Foundation.
Yeah.
Just separate from the Parks Commission. So the foundation is raising money to restore the fountain. I don't know at what level priority that fountain is for the commission.
I mean, it seems, I mean, I don't understand I mean, they call it historic, but that just means it's old.
Benji, you can't be on our historic commission.
What?
You're out. You can't be on our historic commission based on that statement.
I mean, I'm trying to understand why people are interested in restoring it as opposed to finding better uses for the money.
It's not city money, is it? It's privately
It's
privately
donations.
raised money.
Yeah.
But why is the
privately raised.
foundation interested in spending it there as opposed to other?
Ask them.
I think it's probably a beautiful asset. If restored, it would be a beautiful thing that would attract people. And there may be some history. I don't know offhand. There may be something, some story of the history of Ashland tied to it that makes it
I
also
haven't
like,
seen anything on any of the websites that, other than it was produced by this one sculptor that, okay. I mean, just a question in terms of like where people in the city are putting their money and priorities. And when the parks are facing a crunch, why are the people interested in the parks thinking that that's a priority?
You'd probably have to ask the donors,
Yes.
because it's private money. It's
Yep.
it's people who are, coughing it up because it's important to them. A big part of the expense, I think, also is all of I mean, they want to replace all the stairs and the ramps and the access points and curbs, gutters, and sidewalks. And, it's not, they're not spending $1 million on a piece of marble. It's much bigger than that, bigger project.
some of it might be public safety. You don't want stairs that are cracked and allowing people to trip. You don't want any trip hazards at all, for example. So maybe that's part of it.
Y'all, I apologize. I am gonna end this conversation since we are at 2 p.m. and I have to give up this Zoom account for the next meeting. But we'll add to a future agenda fountain discussions.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely as always.